Taken a while, but today liftoff on a strategy the man pulling the levers says should make the UK a virtually zero carbon economy by 2050.
Is that it? Yeah.
Talking to a room full of billionaires, the Prime Minister adopted language he hoped they might understand.
To adapt Gordon Gekko, green is good, green is right, green works.
And then the vision through green-tinted lenses of how a low-carbon future will be paid for.
Innovation, capitalism and a strong government lead, because we face a challenge that is even bigger for humanity, a threat to our way of life that is ultimately far worse than COVID.
Among the industrial relics that made the West rich, but also started the spiral of emissions that had driven climate change, £10 billion of investment by private companies in UK green growth were announced. And for those not wealthy enough to be in this room, heat pump handouts, grants of £5,000 to households in England and Wales.
The questions I would probably ask, is the amount sufficient? Low-income households will need further help and support in terms of being able to provide further assistance from a financial point of view to help them introduce this type of technology.
In total, £450 million, which will pay to replace 90,000 gas boilers, which is a lot until you compare it to the number of gas boilers installed last year, 1.7 million. Along with that heat pump funding, there'll be £620 million in grants for electric vehicles and charge points, a similar sum for tree planting and peat bogs, £140 million to promote carbon capture and storage, and £120 million for small modular nuclear reactors on areas about the size of 2 football pitches.
2 football pitches.
Yeah. Driving that small-scale nuclear revolution is Rolls-Royce.
So the small modular nuclear reactor, we'd love to get that on the grid before the end of the decade, and that's our ambition, but right now it's that sort of time period.
So that sounds like it's going to be costly.
Well, of course it's going to be costly. We're talking about a whole ecosystem that doesn't exist today.
Giving that ecosystem life, say Labour, will need much more money from government.
The plan falls short on delivery. And while there is modest short-term investment, there is nothing like the commitment we believe is required. Isn't the truth, Mr. Speaker, that despite hundreds of pages of plans, strategies and hot air, there is still a chasm with this government between the rhetoric and the reality?
Today was a day of big, bold announcements and a bit of billionaire backslapping, but also, some argue, greenwashing. The Prime Minister spoke of the trillions in spending power in the hands of the investors in that room, money that could go into green investments. But among them were big names that between them have invested hundreds of billions in fossil fuel projects and still do. So whatever the Prime Minister may have said, there is still a long way to go into convincing these investors that either long-term green is more profitable, or morally, whatever the returns from these quote-unquote dirty investments are, they're just not worth it.
We think that the investment is potentially very valuable if it's in genuinely green investments, but we need to take a look at the same time that all the greenwash that goes with it. So many of the same banks and financiers that the Prime Minister is courting today are heavily implicated in the financing of fossil fuels that are cooking our planet and potentially incinerating our future and that of our children as well.
Today's announcements have been broadly welcomed by business. Few think they're enough to deliver all Boris Johnson hopes, but the general consensus is it's a good start. In less than 2 weeks, though, world leaders descend on the UK for the global climate conference COP26, where the Prime Minister doesn't just have to convince them it's a good start, but that they should do the same.
Paul McNamara. So do today's raft of government announcements go far enough to meet the challenge? In a moment, we'll be hearing from our political editor, Gary Gibbon. But first, our climate reporter, Simon Roach, is in Glasgow, where the decisive climate COP summit will be held in just 12 days' time. Simon.
John, if you take the totality of all of the climate policy documents put online today, they actually come to over 1,500 pages. So it's been very busy, but just bear with me. I think it's important, first off, just to understand where we're at currently. The UK has very ambitious climate targets. It wants to reduce its emissions by 78% by 2035 and to be net zero by 2050. Now, the problem is that current policies don't take us anywhere near meeting them. That's what the documents today tried to address. They say that the biggest contributions to carbon reductions over the next 15, 10 years will be from industry. They'll be from steel and cement production, and indeed from the heat and buildings strategy that we've been hearing so much about. They say we'll be relying much less on oil and gas production in power than we have done currently, and that will protect us from some of the price shocks we've seen in fossil fuels recently. Now, in short, this is a plan, and it's very important to stress that it's a plan which may help us meet those climate targets.
Well, that sounds positive enough, but is there a catch, Simon?
Well, the problem here is that once you go beyond that plan and into the specific policies, that's when it becomes a little bit muddier. Let's take agriculture, for example. It contributes a fifth of the UK's carbon emissions, and yet there is very little in today's plan about how we can decarbonise there. Behaviour change. We all need to eat much less meat in the future if we're to meet our climate targets, and yet the government gave very little there again. Now, the green groups I spoke to today said that they're quite sceptical still when the government is subsidising fossil fuels with one arm and then rolling out these green policies with the other. Other experts I spoke to said that ultimately they're going to see much more detail on the specific policies that are part of these strategies before they're truly encouraged. Ultimately, the main thing will be that these plans are only as good as the money that's backing them, and at the moment there's simply not enough of that.
Simon Roach reporting. Well, now, on that issue of money, the Treasury has released its analysis of the plan today as well. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is in Westminster. Gary, what did we learn?
Well, as Simon was saying there, climate change groups have been saying for years that this will cost a lot of money to turn an economy around and make it carbon neutral. How much money is the Treasury actually adding to what it's already spending on all of that? Well, it's not clear from these documents. It may be slightly clearer when we get the spending round, but you wouldn't want to bet the house on it. Some green pressure groups have been having a go at trying to crack through the numbers. One of them reckons there's not much more than about £1 billion extra a year that the Treasury has committed to here. And that opens up quite a lot of clear red water between Labour, which is committed to 28 billion a year of additional spending, and the Tory party. But it also tells you a bit about the Tory party's plan of action. Boris Johnson, as you were hearing in Paul's report, has been speaking to business and in a tone, a very friendly tone, which is not always the one he adopts with business. He wants business to put in £90 billion of investment a year into all of this. And that raises all sorts of questions about whether they can do it and also where their costs go. If business costs go up, they tend to pass them on in prices. That's not very redistributive. And that could mean that poorer people end up paying for more of this green revolution than might be equitable. Some Tories who are sceptics about all of this as saying, well, in the end, that will be what takes Boris Johnson off this track, and it will be the opinion polls telling him that the cost of living is going up. But right now, you have to say that there is very big stuff in this announcement today, big policy changes like requiring car manufacturers to do a certain amount of their cars as electric vehicles, mandating them to do it, very big stuff which Tory Prime Ministers like David Cameron wouldn't have done in the past, didn't, but there is a question about delivery.
Gary Gibbon reporting.